Well, this was interesting. Winback Covert Operations was an old Nintendo 64 game that had a very strange tagline on the back of the box, which went along the lines of the closest thing to Metal Gear Solid on your N64. I actually had this game back then, and at the time, I really don't think that statement held up either back then or now, Metal Gear Solid 5 later, not to mention all the Splinter Cells we've had. Having owned the game back on the Nintendo 64 and actually playing through a few times for some reason, probably sheer boredom back then, it played just the same as it did back then. This is just a port of a very blocky and drab Nintendo 64 game. Any technical issues I did come across, notably clipping, were things that already existed in the 64 cartridge, so overall a smooth transition to the Switch Online service. So if you're already familiar with the game or owned it yourself and are itching to play it again, I'd say go for it, as the experience really didn't feel any different now than it did back then. Well, how does it look on the Switch? If you're judging it on its own merit relative to the N64 games of that generation, well, it looks like a Nintendo 64 game, an early one at least, only a little less vibrant than, say, Super Mario 64 or Banjo-Kazooie. The protagonist of the story, Jean-Luc Cougar and team, all wear tactical gear that's black and blue, and the textures are very repetitive throughout the few areas that you'll be visiting. There aren't many. There are some outer grounds, a very bland office building, a factory area, and a base area. It's a lot of gray and a lot of bland and repetition, whether that's from the graphics or the sound bites or the bad guys constantly yelling freeze, halt, or over there. Seriously, you will hear that over and over and over again. So what's happening in Winback? The bad guys have stolen a military satellite weapon, fired it once already, and it's your job to stop them from doing it again and find your missing team in the process. Maybe highly inspired or ripped off from the plot of GoldenEye, but that's what we got here. It's a pretty one-noted story for a highly repetitive game, which leads me to the next point, the music. You won't hear more than about 5 or 6 tracks in the game, and though I did really like the initial few stages of spy-inspired music, made more dramatic when you're low on health, it's just another thing that gets tiresome after a while. Aside from the yells of the guards I mentioned earlier, there's no real voiceover in the game, and dialogue is pretty cheesy. At one point, Jean-Luc utters the word Cripes, which I do wish had actual VO if just for the comedic aspect. Gameplay-wise, Omega Force put a lot of faith into their cover and targeting mechanism, and it still works well, though there were some walls that for some reason it wouldn't let me hug my back to, which is unfortunate because that's what pretty much the entire gameplay is based on. There's other times that instead of popping out where you want him to, Jean-Luc will dramatically somersault in the opposite direction and point his gun at the wall or something. Fantastic. Aside from one of the terrorists who is a knife-wielding maniac that charges at you while you're ducking behind a wall, pretty much every other bad guy stands around, and it's more or less a cover shooter gallery, with baddies that don't really move around a whole lot. I especially get a kick out of some of the guys that see you when you pop out from behind a wall or a box, take a look at you, and then you'll duck back down, and then they'll look back in the direction they were looking at, completely forgetting that you just popped up. It's kind of strange. There's not a substantial amount of weapons to your arsenal either, with a mere handgun, though you get infinite ammo for it, a shotgun, a submachine gun, a rocket launcher, and the occasional plastic explosive. Sometimes you get to find a handgun with a silencer, but there's not too much to the weaponry, though the guns are fun to shoot with the laser sight. Since you have to stand still to shoot your guns, it's too bad we couldn't have some IR aiming, because going back to that clunky way of shooting is a nuisance after you've been playing any first-person game with pointer controls to look around or shoot. Also, what kind of tactical team, again, doesn't think to bring any kind of silencers? You can occasionally find a handgun with a silencer, but ammo is scarce, and these aren't very common pickups. I did have fun at some of the bosses since they are a bit brainier than the guards, so that offered a bit more of a challenge, and that's coming from a very story-driven over difficulty-driven gamer. The game has a decent pause screen where you can look at info on the status of your team, and you also have a very basic map to your disposal. There's no real compass or anything like that, but you can usually tell where you need to go because there's enemies there. If you hit a dead end, you can simply turn around and some new bad guys will pretty much appear and direct you to where you need to go next. The few cutscenes that are in there are not extraordinary, especially if the game is trying to compare itself to Metal Gear Solid, but I had a decent time revisiting the first half of the game so far. I'm not entirely sure I'll give this an entire replay through, but if nothing else, I certainly got a few laughs out of hiding behind a box that put about 3 feet in between me and a bad guy, and again as I watch them look at me and then turn around and look at me and turn around. It's amusing, to say the least. So maybe if you need some laughs or something. Overall, Winback Covert Operations, it's a very mixed bag. The cover mechanic mostly works well, but it's so prevalent in modern games that Winback almost serves as a history lesson example of how far things have come. This was also a nostalgic experience for me, and back in the 64 days, I definitely had a bit more fun with the game than this playthrough. By today's standards, this is a dull and repetitive game, but you might get some laughs from the oblivious guards at least. Especially when they get stuck while running toward you, fully aware of your presence, then stop, take a step back, and turn around. A real kind of, hey look, squirrel moment. But anyway, why this game made it to Switch Online, I don't know. I'm hoping Splinter Cell will one day arrive on the Switch, but unless you have no other means to play any other cover shooter and you really want to hear freeze, halt, and over there over and over and over, knock yourself out. And especially since they were trying to compete with Konami, honestly I think they should have just brought something like Hybrid Heaven over, but whatever. Winback is here, it's on the Switch if you want to play it on the online service, and especially for today, it's kind of meh, but I had some laughs, and it's a little bit of a nostalgia trip for me. So anyway, thanks for watching. Even if you don't play Winback, I hope you found this video entertaining, and I will return soon. Help out the channel by subscribing, liking, sharing, commenting below your thoughts on Winback or other stuff, and I will catch you in the next video.